Man, Gabfest.
All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to D Infinity Live, your multi-platform, multi-publisher online gaming video podcast, where our hosts are credulous, our style is nebulous, our souls are tenebrous, and I hope we didn't all get tetanus. I am your host, William Big T Thrasher. With me is returning co-host Richard T Balsley. How you doing, Richard?
Good, you?
I'm doing all right. I'm here enjoying my water in a cup with a guy on it, and also my good friend Pino is here as well. So I'm doing very well tonight.
Cool.
And I see you've got some fresh laundry behind you.
Oh, blankets, actually, but yeah, close enough.
Cool. And tonight our topic is Cthulhu Live, the live-action version of Call of Cthulhu, the Cthulhu Mythos LARP. And we've got a lot to talk about tonight. But before we do that, Richard, what is going on with our co-publisher Skirmisher?
Well, the big news for those who haven't really been paying attention to, I don't know, RPG.
Our viewers are observant. They've been paying attention.
Yeah, I was going to say. Otherwise, you'd all know that there's a huge sale going on. Same sale that always goes on this time of year, which is One Bookshelf's many different websites, like Wargamers Vault, RPG Now, and the big one, Drive Through RPG, is having their Christmas and July sale. And all of our products are in that sale. So everything is 25% off right now. And
very cool.
And as of this morning, we have Coast Island added to our list of growing, popular items to, get on bestseller status. It's now a copper bestseller.
Oh, very cool. And with any luck, Lives of Coast, which if regrettably, Mike Jolly Varhola cannot be here with us tonight, but if he was here, I'm sure he would tell you that Lives of Coast is now out in PDF form, and with any luck, that will be a copper bestseller within the next month or two. And then he would shake his fist at some youngins and condemn somebody.
Well, with 115 NPCs described for only $3.99, that's a pretty good deal. So.
Very cool. Now, as far as what we've got going on right now on our website, d-infinity.net, we've actually had a flurry of activities. We've got Clint Staples and I, a friend of the show, Clint Staples. We have 2 new oddities articles that have been growing on d-infinity.net. The first are Oddities for a Thieves Guild, which, as of last night, reached 105 entries. So if you want more random things to find or encounter in a Thieves Guild, then you can roll on a pair of percentile dice. Check out the Oddities for a Thieves Guild. We also just started Oddities for a Graveyard, which is turning out to be a really cool, creepy, atmospheric list of random items and encounters. Oh, and also for people who like obscure forms of divination, we've also posted a new knowledge skill for Pathfinder, Tyromancy, which is the art of divining omens by examining cheeses. And so you can use you can take your character can now examine cheeses to get insight bonuses on certain rolls, and also with this skill you can use cheese as an additional material component for divination spells to get bonuses to your caster level for determining the spell outcome. Anything on d-infinity.net that's been jumping out for you, Richard?
No, not particularly. I haven't really had time to look at that. Been working on some behind-the-scenes things for Skirmisher, so unfortunately I can't really go into that, though.
Top secret?
Yeah.
Bottom secret as well? Got to cover from all angles?
Pretty much.
Very cool. Well, when it is time for the news to break, you will hear about it here on D-Infinity Live. But now I think it's time to delve into the awe-inspiring horror that is the Cthulhu mythos in LARPing, Cthulhu Live. I only bring this out to illustrate some of the masks and props we use in some of our Cthulhu Live events. This is our big Cthulhu head. But yes, Cthulhu Live is actually a pretty important game to me, because it's the game that got me into professional game. Whoa! A phantom appears before me. ladies and gentlemen, we are being joined by the creator of Cthulhu Live, Robert Mac McLaughlin. He is joining us as we speak. Mac, how are you doing? Mac, are we coming through for you? Mac, you are live on the internet.
Great. Yeah, again, I apologize for being a little on the late side.
That's quite all right. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Robert Mac McLaughlin, the creator of Cthulhu Live. How you doing, Mac?
Good. Now it's been a while. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing pretty well. I was actually just explaining to our viewers that Cthulhu Live is actually what got me into game design.
Well, very cool. Glad to hear that. You've done a lot over the years.
Yeah, since then it got the snowball rolling. Back in college, we had started doing Cthulhu Live as an alternative to Vampire LARPs and had a lot of success. And after graduating from college, I went to Gen Con in 2004, Mac, where I met you at a PST Productions game. And after the game, we were just, we're all just kind of talking together, gabbing, and I was showing you photos from some of our events, and I'd also brought some of the props we had made, including an awesome giant Necronomicon with aged pages. And within a few months after that Gen Con, you had called me to let me know that Skirmisher was developing a third edition of Cthulhu Live, and since I was kind of so invested in the game at that point, you asked if I wanted to join the development team. I of course said yes, and 10 years later, here I am. So I do owe you some thanks for that.
Oh, well, you and the Kettle of Fish Productions, I mean, you guys were, really great with getting third edition together and the supplements, and I'm really glad that you've, been such a great asset to Skirmisher and had so much fun with it.
I have. It's been a great thrill ride. We're still running Cthulhu Live games to this day. We're actually working on 3 huge ones for Gen Con coming up. But actually, Mac, before we get into questions from the audience, do you want to tell us anything about Cthulhu Live or its genesis?
Oh gosh, I mean, I don't know if I've got anything too really remarkable or revealing. Again, I had started gaming like most folks with D&D, and I discovered Call of Cthulhu, and then really just it was. I mean, honestly, Cthulhu Live was really my first effort at actual. I guess you could also say it was my first effort at actually putting together an actual game product as well too. So it was fun. It certainly evolved and changed a lot over the different editions.
Oh, very cool, and it's currently on the 3rd edition. Gosh, when did that first edition come out? Was that 92?
No, it would have probably been around. It's probably around the end of '94 or beginning of '95, probably.
Very cool. You see, I should have. I've got my 1st edition downstairs. I should have thought to bring it up. Oh right, and Richard, what's your take on Cthulhu Live?
I think it's an interesting system. I noticed that it's far different from the Mind's Eye Theater games for the White Wolf system, World of Darkness and everything. And the thing that caught my attention, I think, the most was the color code thing, and I was wondering how that came about.
Well, for those of you who aren't familiar with Cthulhu Live, in any Cthulhu Mythos game, characters will actually risk their sanity, and so the sanity system we use in Cthulhu Live is color coded. And that was actually the idea of a color-coded sanity system actually came out of if I'm remembering correctly, it was a French Cthulhu Live group. I believe the Celophaeus Foundation, if I remember correctly, was their name. And in the first 2 editions of Cthulhu Live, if there was something that could risk your sanity, the keeper would actually have to shout out a number, and then you would see on your sheet, what your sanity number was and how much you'd lose based on whatever the GM called out. And they kind of thought that was a bit cumbersome and artificial, so they had come up with a system by which anything that could cost you sanity would be labeled in a real obvious way. So, like, if there was a monster that would cost you sanity to encounter, the monster might have like a big dangling piece of colored cloth hanging off of its arm or like as a sash around its body. A tome that costs you sanity, the translations might be printed on colored pages. And if that color matched up to one of the colors on your character sheet, then you knew that that would drive your character insane. So we took that idea and just made it a bit more formalized. It was, the war on terror was in full swing when we came up with it. So the color code, it was from least intense to most intense was like green, blue, yellow, orange, red. And your character would have a code called the Shade of Terror, which would be one of those colors, and any color that that color and any more intense color on the scale would cost you a sanity level. And there were 6 sanity levels, and there weren't too many hard rules attached to the sanity levels, but they were sort of a general guideline, a role-playing guideline from your mental state. So you might drop a sanity level and you'd become scared, or you might drop a sanity level and become shaken, or what have you, until you hit the bottom, which was stark raving mad, from which there is no return. Mac, was I correct on the origin for that? Was that the Celophaeus Foundation?
I believe it was, and like I mentioned, pretty much each edition of Cthulhu Live really had a number of revisions, and I guess I must say, somewhat apologetically, the reason why you began to see a number of changes in different aspects of the rules at each one. Again, it was my first effort really at a serious game design. And to be honest, I was still, at that point, very, very new into live action gaming. And since I'd come very much from a tabletop background, it's still very hard to get numbers and tables and, and more, things that are not that cumbersome to do around a tabletop that I, kept dragging into the live action. And so over time, I think we began to find things like the sanity system that really kind of streamlined and cleaned up some of the things that were a little bit complicated from, the genesis coming more from a tabletop gamer.
Oh, very cool. And let me see, we've got our first question of the evening. Comes from friend of the show, Daryl Mott Jr., who's also the co-host of the Gamers Tavern podcast. Wants to know, what makes LARPs of the Mythos different from tabletop versions? Well, and the most obvious is simply that it's a LARP. You're standing up. You're generally more in character. Costuming gets involved. It's much more three-dimensional. You actually have a space to interact in, and oftentimes a space to explore. But for me, the biggest difference between Cthulhu Mythos LARPing and Cthulhu Mythos on the tabletop, and Cthulhu Mythos LARPing versus any other kind of LARPing I've encountered, is that it's much more tactile. And this, is in part because in Cthulhu Live there was a lot of emphasis put on creepy atmospheric props and special effects and set pieces. We've had games where not only do we have like a person in a monster costume, we will douse that monster costume in KY jelly. So if the monster gets on you, you're actually getting slimed and it's leaving handprints and trails everywhere. I mean, it gives you tremendous license to just have these, to engage as many senses as possible. How about you, Mac? What's your take on that?
Well, you're right. I mean, the tactile element's good, and definitely it's, and I guess there's certainly like a fun just appreciation of craftsmanship. There's a lot of folks that get into Cthulhu Live. A lot of them just love prop building, and some people get into Cthulhu Live because they like prop building. And I think that's one of the fun things about the live action mythos gaming is that, I mean, of course, on a tabletop or a traditional Call of Cthulhu, I mean, you can go anywhere, you can get involved, anything can be involved in the game because it's all just verbally descriptive. Whereas, in the live action game, you actually have to come. There's still suspension of disbelief, but there's still certain deliverables that are expected for the interaction of the live gaming. And I think that there's just that appreciation of coming to a Cthulhu Live game sometime, or a Mythos Live game in general, just saying, wow, I wonder what really cool props and what cool effects are going to be worked into this one, and really kind of enjoying that, taking part and experiencing that craftsmanship that the game staff really enjoys putting together. That's another fun aspect that you don't necessarily have in the tabletop experience.
Yeah, we've done some pretty crazy things. We've set off we've set off stink bombs, done all sorts of stuff with smoke machines and ground foggers. Oh, actually, in a great variation of the monster soaked in KY jelly, we had done a game where we had wrapped a bunch of towels up into tubes and soaked them. We soaked them in, like, I think it was like a mixture of water and cornstarch. It was something to make them really, really slimy. This was actually for a Cthulhu Life scenario called Sight Unseen, and the whole premise behind that, it's all inspired by that, game you used to do, like in your local neighborhood haunted house, where they'd blindfold you and they'd put your hands in different bowls of disgusting things. Well, this is that kind of writ large with the big narrative. The whole premise is your investigators have been blinded and have to navigate their way out of this horrible situation without the sense of sight, and that gives you so much more license to do all sorts of crazy, like, tactile things. So we had these towels rolled up and soaked in water and cornstarch. So when the monster appeared, we had this horrible, monster sound effect playing, but then we had two people basically slapping people with these noodles, or with these like wet, slimy towels, so they're actually, like, getting slimed and tentacled by the monster that they were encountering. And because in the moment you can't really, like, it doesn't feel like you're being hit with a wet towel. It feels like some weird sea anemone thing is trying to suck your face off. It is a really, really great, creepy sensation. Let's see, next. Oh, and we have another one from Daryl Mott Jr. Wants to know, what is more important when organizing a Mythos game, creating a horrific atmosphere for the players, or letting the players create the horrific atmosphere themselves, or are they equally important? Richard, do you have any stance on this?
I'll let Matt go first. He's
Cool.
he's more in the large than I am, so.
Well, I mean, I would, at least from my vantage point, or my perspective, I'd say they're equally important because, I mean, certainly when folks come to a LARP, I think they absolutely want to put their input into it. They want to be part of the storytelling. I think they want to be involved in its development. I think in a Mythos LARP, there's a greater understanding and acceptance of the players that they will have maybe more constraints into what they can and can't do and what they can and can't change in the Mythos world as opposed to maybe some other LARPs. But I think it's still very important to design the games that still gives them a pretty good space to run around. And as far as designing really the horrific experience, that's actually, it can be done. And and again, I always go back to Will's Sight Unseen game. It's just an incredibly cool game that is scary as hell with some of the effects that he creates in it. Is that that suspension of disbelief, because certainly it's kind of hard to accurately replicate something that by sight would legitimately drive you insane. So there's certainly that suspension of disbelief going, and and that's why some Cthulhu Live games have a horrific aspect, but a little bit of some of them still have kind of a little tongue-in-cheek overtone they're kind of having some fun with. But I think it is. I mean, I guess to kind of come back to the question, I think it is important to both, kind of meet the players halfway from what the game staff is bringing to the game, but still being really cognizant that you want to leave enough space in the game design and the character development design for them to still have a good bit of room to run around in without having to rein them in and keep them engaged with the game itself and the story development.
Yeah, I think the keeper. I think as a keeper, you should do as much as you can with the space you have and the resources you have to help build a good creepy atmosphere. But there's lots of things you can do to encourage players to create their own creepy atmosphere. One of the things that we do with Cthulhu Live is we do everything we can to avoid having NPCs. If a character is going to be in the game at all, we try to make it a fully fleshed out player character. So. Unlike a tabletop Mythos game, it's assumed everyone's playing an investigator, everybody's playing somebody who's trying to stop the forces of the Cthulhu Mythos. In Cthulhu Live, instead, there are going to be some players who are playing people who have a Cthulhu Mythos agenda, who are trying to wake up ancient gods or make certain horrible sacrifices. And just by giving the right players the right motivations and the right kind of character traits, players can go a long way towards building atmosphere. The people can really really get into it. If you have a character that is written with like a paranoid delusional psychosis, give them a full rundown of all their different delusions and bits of paranoia. And if you're really tricky, don't tell them that they're playing a character with delusions. Just write everything on the sheet as if it's fact and let the player just roll with it. And they will do things that start to unnerve other players and make people nervous. And people are going to start wondering, well, is that person crazy because they're just crazy? Is that person crazy because they're a cultist? Is this a con artist pretending to have a mental disorder? For me, I love putting things in a game that creates a real paranoid atmosphere where the players don't know who to trust, but the tension keeps ramping up really until something breaks. Whether one character murders another or the sacrifice is made and everything goes to hell, often quite literally. Paranoia is kind of my favorite atmosphere to work into a game.
Yeah. I'd have to say that in answer to this question, to build off of some of what Mac had said, as well as what Will has brought up, is that one of the things that you have to do if you're running a game, and this is something I learned from storytelling classes, as well as what you have to do if you're writing a film script, is that you have to build the atmosphere first. Like the suspension of disbelief comes in play here because no matter what happens, the people that are participating, whether it's to listen to a story or to actually be in a story, they want to to suspend their belief, right, or disbelief in that particular item. They want to believe that what you've created is real for the duration of the story. And in order to do that, you have to make sure that whatever elements that you want in that particular game, you have to make sure that they're there before the players arrive, so that way they jump into that mindset. So they'll create the rest of the atmosphere just based off of the information you give them. It's like with characters in novels. I know this is kind of seems like it'll be a little off topic here, but if you look at your favorite characters in a story, how many traits do you actually see that gives you a full description of what a character looks like? Usually it's only a couple of items here or there. The rest of the details you make up, and they're reinforced by having one trait repeated like at least 3 times within the first few pages of their appearance.
Oh, actually, we were talking about atmosphere. I was just wondering if any of you had any stories about actual moments where you were actually able to scare somebody in a Cthulhu Live game. And I guess one thing I do want to, and I think we talked about fear in gaming before, and it's a very dangerous thing because you don't really want anybody to feel actual fear, whether it's LARP or tabletop, because that ends the game. Because once you feel actual fear, your fight or flight response gets triggered, and suddenly the odds that something could go very wrong have just increased dramatically. So when I'm running a Cthulhu Live game, my goal is never to make anyone in the game actually feel fear. However, I do want to do whatever I can to spook somebody, to give them a good kind of jolt scare, like in a haunted house, where it's real quick, it's over in a second, and you can catch your breath and realize that it's all in good fun. And I'm happy to say I've been a part of several of those. The very first Cthulhu Live game we ever did, this was back at when I was attending the Savannah College of Art and Design at the SCAD Gamers Guild, the main gaming club. We had as a special Halloween event, did a Cthulhu Live game called Shadows in the Langley House, all about this crazy scientist and inventor named Langley who died in a mysterious laboratory fire. So various friends and enemies show up at his house for a reading of the will, and they get trapped inside, and there was a monster and whatnot. And the ballroom we had set up dividers to actually create the Langley house, and there was a service corridor that ran parallel to the ballroom that had different doors to get in and out of the ballroom, just all up and down the wall. And so we very purposefully made sure that one of those doors connected to the area we were using for the laboratory, and we had stashed a giant tentacle monster puppet that we had spent all weekend building in there. It was just this big tumorous body and these a set of 4 8-foot-long tentacle puppet arms that were pretty articulated. The whole thing took roughly 3 people to operate to look really good. So we had that set up behind the door, and nobody knew it was there, because as far as anyone knew, those service doors were locked. We had actually said that the doors were locked when the game began. They of course weren't, because we wanted to use them. So as 3 investigators are trying to repair a machine, we have that door open and we have the tentacle monster come out and try to grab somebody. The person who was farthest from the door saw that, jumped in the air, turned around, landed, and shot out of the room, and apparently ran all the way to the main entrance to the ballroom before realizing that was just kind of this carnival scare that we had just done. But it was really great. Like, we knew we were doing the right thing when that happened. How about you, Mac? Any good actual scares in any games?
We had like the big hidden tentacle monster. I remember that turned out pretty well once at it's a convention. Unfortunately, it's not running anymore. It's a fun convention called Phantasm that used to run in Georgia, and I want to say it was in Athens, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was in Athens, and it was in it was like little hotels. It looks like an assembly of a old town area, and there's like an independent building. It was like an old house, basically. It was in the middle of this courtyard of other little buildings that we actually had for the event. It was really cool, and I think we ran the
was it the auction?
Well, I know we ran the auction there at that location because we were there a couple times for Phantasm. But no, I'm embarrassed that the name escapes me at the moment. It was the script that actually I based on the Blue Oyster Cult Imagineers album.
Was that the Black Mirror?
Yeah.
I want to say that was the name of it.
But anyway, and we had the hidden tentacle monster in that one. I remember that turned out really well. And but kind of like Will says, I mean, you really don't want to have someone that's like damaged, but getting a good little carnival scare and yelp and scream and jump is great when you get that done. And people then kind of laugh at themselves later. So, oh, yeah, that was good.
Oh yeah. No, Richard, you have not played in Cthulhu Live, have you?
No, I haven't. But I do have a copy of the rules, and I thought they were pretty interesting. And the way that the stat system is set up was pretty intriguing.
Yeah, the one thing, and this is something that I've carried over into some my own LARP design, is one of the things that I really appreciated with Cthulhu Live is that the rules don't presume that you are going to have to play a character that's any more or less clever than you are. So as a result, there's no intelligence stat. How smart or dumb your character is really all comes down to how that character is written and how you choose to play them. So you'll never have those situations where you'll come up with a plan and the GM says, well, your character is too stupid to come up with that plan. I absolutely hate those moments, especially in LARPs. So the only thing that matters to the character is their technical knowledge. So while they don't have an intelligence stat, they do have an education stat, which is just a measure of how much formal education and how many technical skills they have. And I find that works that works much better, because it's the technical skills are the things that you're actually going to be simulating, not raw intelligence or wit. Now, Mac, was there any particular reason why you stripped down the Call of Cthulhu? Because I think Call of Cthulhu has roughly nine stats, but you stripped them down to 4.
Well, again, some of it's like I said, the particularly first edition still carried over a lot of things that were harder for me to completely get my head out of from tabletop gaming experience, and that's why particularly the earlier versions of Cthulhu Live were probably even more rules heavy, and some of that became streamlined and simplified in later editions. But yeah, I knew for sure that there's just no way that someone can reasonably keep it in their head their levels of 9 stats, whereas if we could boil it down to just four of the Cthulhu Live stats that pretty well can define a character, maybe not exhaustively, but pretty well, it's a lot easier for them to probably actually keep those numbers in mind when it comes to test. So they're not having to, constantly be checking their little cheat sheet and kind of breaking character, and that it's a lot easier to streamline it down so that hopefully after they study their character for a little while, they can really retain most of that information in their head. So that was part of it. But just really realizing that, like you said, I didn't want to hamstring anybody by the intelligence stat, that, someone might absolutely be smart enough to come up with a great plan. The only thing would be then, okay, well, does your character have the technical skills to execute it? Or maybe you can tell one of the other characters about your plan, and maybe they have the skills to actually execute some of the things you envisioned. Same thing obviously with, strength. We really said no reason to do strength. Charisma. Be as charming as you can be, or not as charming as you can be. And we just really tried to look at the Cthulhu Live stats and say, well, if we really need to strip these down, what are the ones that will probably translate best to the experience that we want to try to keep them alive, live experience.
Yeah, that's actually another thing I want to. You mentioned, leaving out the appearance stat and the charisma stat. I really want to thank you for doing that, because I had played in a number of LARPs before getting into Cthulhu Live, and one of the things that always bothered me was like any rules regarding like social interaction mechanics, and I didn't realize what bothered me until I ran Cthulhu Live and ran in a game where there were no rules governing social interaction. And that's simply that no matter how the rules for social interaction are written, and no matter how they're intended, they always function in a manner that is indistinguishable from mind control. And they always pretty much allow you, in very broad situations, to dictate the actions of other players' characters. And I always just found that, very unsatisfying, whereas, in Cthulhu Live, it really all comes down to how the players choose to interact, and the only time a player is going to have sort of a decision forced on them is when they are specifically being mind controlled, most often by a cultist or some other powerful and malevolent psychic being.
That's actually a fun insight, and yeah, you're right. Basically, it allows, like you said, since we have players in Cthulhu Live who sometimes have, maybe sinister agendas, or maybe not the most socially friendly agendas, it's actually kind of fun for them to actually say, okay, here's what I want to accomplish, this very antisocial and evil act. Can I really fool people? Can I really trick these people using my own wits and skill and charm into believing these lines of bullshit I'm about to give them? And that's fun. And I think that's why some people really thrive on playing. Oh, who do you have as one of the villains in the game? They really enjoy, because then they can kind of pull out the stops and try to accomplish things that they normally really shouldn't be doing in real life, and see how well they can do it.
Yeah, I guess another thing I really like about Cthulhu Live is that for certain players, the distinction between the good guys and the bad guys gets really, really fluid. There's a sort of a character transformation I've seen happen time and time again, where once the dark and supernatural aspects of the scenario start to really come into the foreground, there is almost always a player who knows that they're not one of the cultists, but knows that they absolutely cannot trust anybody, and is always preparing a contingency plan in case any particular person around them turns out to be the source for all the dark supernatural shenanigans, which is great, because once they really start buying into the paranoia, half the time when they lash out against the person they think is the cultist, half the time they're wrong, and that just increases the level of chaos in the game. Is the guy with the creepy old book just a librarian with a rare book collection, or is he a sorcerer who's going to use that book to summon something terrible?
and
And that's
that,
also great. Like it's fun. As fun as it can be when this happens in tabletop, it's so much more awesome in LARPs, where you have like a group of characters and they have all the equipment they need to work some sort of ritual for good or ill, and they are fiercely divided on whether or not the ritual should be attempted. You know, if you read from that book, I will shoot you in the head. If you shoot him in the head, I'll shoot you. It'll be worth it. No demons will get summoned, but there's a demon out there. We have to summon a demon to kick that demon's butt, and it just. I love seeing people interact like that.
yeah, just talking about like rituals. I mean that reminds me of I mean one of my maybe top 3 or 4 favorite Cthulhu Live scripts. We've ran it. You and I've ran it several times too. Is oh gosh, the Angel of Prague, and that's
yes.
a fun experience because we really took a ton of information from Hermetic magic books. Basically created a ritual using a lot of Hermetic magic books. Used all kinds of parallels and hidden meanings that you find in these books that will kind of mask this ritual that supposedly had been concealed to help protect humanity from performing it. And the players, representing a group of different occultists from different organizations, were using a mixture of tomes that we created, copies of real-world occult books, trying to get all these threads together from all these multiple sources to reconstruct this elaborate ritual, and that was really fun because that was really a live experience. I mean, really kind of getting them to feel like what some of their characters sometimes do in the tabletop game. I mean, you're just sometimes you'd see some people that are off plotting in a corner, and then there's another group over at a table somewhere just with this big stack of books and papers, and they're just going through and flipping and trying to tie all these facts together. And that was really kind of cool.
Yeah, actually, the Angel of Prague is a perfect example of another thing that I see more in Cthulhu Live, like than other kinds of LARPs, is having like sort of actual kind of like puzzles and challenges. Actually the main occult reference to the Angel of Prague is this book here, The Magus by Francis Barrett, which was a book on occult philosophy from I believe the late 1800s, and it has these like Hermetic correspondence tables, and for the ritual that most of the characters need to cast, you have to go through these tables and decode the ritual to get it to work. And the thing I like, and I don't know if this was intentional, maybe you can answer this question, Mac, but the ritual is so complicated that anytime I've run it, no one is ever sure that they've got it right. And so when things go to hell at the end of the game, no one is sure whether that's what the ritual was always going to do, or if that is what happened because they did the ritual improperly.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, I can't honestly say that was specifically the intent, but yeah, I was definitely trying to make it a real challenge for that particular game. And since virtually the entire game revolved around, there was a lot of subplots going on, but the whole game was basically about reconstructing this ritual. I wanted to make sure that it was going to keep them busy for a few hours.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, that's speaking of puzzles. This was actually at a PST Productions game at Gen Con many years ago. I forget the title, but it all took place in China, in this like mine shaft where like some ancient civilization had been discovered, and there were all these different international people coming in to check this and all these antiquities out. Well, one of the things in the game is there's a character that has a file folder full of coded documents in it, and they actually are documents in code, and part of the game is that person has to find the cipher and decode what's in these documents, because what's in the documents have kind of a bearing on what's going on in the rest of the game. Well, when we ran it, the player who got the character with those documents happened to be a Navy cryptographer, and just in his head, in 5 minutes, had decoded every single document in the file folder while we were doing the rules explanation before play actually began. But just a fun thing with real world skills crossing over into the game.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed about the rule system, and I thought was interesting, was that magic has more of a cost than just power. That it had a sanity check involved with it, even the healing spells. So I thought that was really interesting. I was wondering what was the decision behind having all spells have a sanity check attached to them.
Well, I mean, and I think Will could, I mean, if my memory is off on this, I mean, I think Will could probably back me up, but pretty much even within the tabletop game, I mean, magic, really, there's no magic that comes without some cost, just because it's just that alien. I mean, just actually manipulating, the laws of reality is just so alien and unnatural for the human psyche. There's really no magic really that doesn't come with some sort of cost, even simple and even relatively simple spells and beneficial spells.
Yeah, and that is carried over from the tabletop Call of Cthulhu. Most magic in the Call of Cthulhu tabletop, in addition to having a magic point cost, will have some sort of sanity cost associated with it. With only I think there's only a handful of exceptions, and we've tried to carry that over into Cthulhu Live Third Edition, and beyond that, when I write new, because I tend to incorporate a lot of new magic spells and rituals for the cultists and for the sorcerers and whatnot. When I'm designing a Cthulhu Live scenario, I will often take it even further, where the ritual not only will require magic points and will risk sanity, but will also require like a very specific material component. Like you might actually require, okay, like you need the left eye of a murderer. Well, to get that, you've got to find out which one of the other characters in the game in the past has killed somebody. Or if you're really ruthless, trick someone into killing somebody so they count as a murderer for the purposes of the spell and then take their eye. Or spells that drain stats, spells that drain memory, spells that mutate you. We once did a game where we had 10 index cards, and anytime this one spell was cast, the person who cast it would become less human, and so we would flip over the top index card and find out what had changed. Maybe they grew scales, maybe they grew with a third eye somewhere on their body. And some of these had actual rules effects, but if they kept casting that spell, eventually they would just turn into a puddle of jelly covered with eyeballs and mouths. And it's all about whether or not you're willing to take those risks, which is something I love. I mean, it really, you are taking a risk, and it had better be a calculated risk anytime your character in Cthulhu Live uses some sort of magic or supernatural ability. You really can't be careless with it, or else it will come back and bite you.
And we actually in one of the supplement books too, that was specifically expanding the rules of playing cultists and even demi-human entities.
Was that the Shades of Grey?
Yeah. Well, no, actually, it was the was Shades of Grey. That was our more of our pulp fiction one. Where do I have my books? It was Lost Souls.
Oh yes.
We actually introduced a kind of basically Lost Souls was really much more dedicated to running campaigns where maybe the campaign was really based around a cult or groups of cults fighting secret wars, and we actually at that point introduced a stat specifically for the villain type characters. Called Facade, and it was basically kind of the villain's version of sanity, with the idea that as normal humans are exposed to these things and perform unnatural magic and are see horrors, they start going crazy. The idea was that the cultists are already crazy. They're already fundamentally insane by the immersion they have in this, but instead they have facade, basically the facade of normalcy. That even though they're crazy, they've kept their stuff together enough to interact and behave as a normal person most of the time. But even as they began to, cast, willy-nilly, spells willy-nilly, or murder people, or do things that would kind of awaken these animalistic instincts, their facade would begin to break down, and they would begin to act more and more crazy as it happened. And that was meant as like a little bit of a also a safety valve, just so when people were playing cultists, they wouldn't just go hog wild and for the first half hour of the game wiping out everything. The faster and more violently they did these things, the less control they had over keeping themselves upright and normal, essentially.
Yeah, and the facade is a really fun mechanic. And one thing that we've been playing around with is the idea that since facade is your mask of normalcy, that it can chip away, but you can also kind of plaster more of it back on. Something we've been doing in a lot of our convention games is if you have facade, you can earn facade back, but you've got to do something to ground yourself, and it's always some weird thing. You'll go to the keeper and say, "I want to earn back a level of facade," and we'll say, "Okay, you need to arrange every chair in this room at a right angle, or you need to count how many doorknobs there are in the hallway," or some sort of little, somewhat obsessive compulsive task. And if they accomplish it, they get their facade back. Now, the thing is, if you're playing a game and you see someone doing something like straightening chairs, are they trying to earn back facade, or did their boss just tell them to clean up the room and organize the chairs? Or are they a character that comes pre-written with a note that says you are compelled to arrange things at right angles? We always, again, to build more paranoia, we always make sure that whatever task we give to someone to earn back facade will raise doubts in people's minds about what's going on. Because if you see someone doing a weird action, you'll never be 100% sure if it's a cultist or somebody who's doing this for completely honest and straightforward reasons. Richard, any thoughts on facade?
I think it's an interesting concept. I mean, I think a lot of role-playing games, tabletop games in general, overlook that as part of a character because we're so used to working together in a group that I think, with the exception of maybe a thief character, nobody really pays attention to that aspect of gaming. I mean, even though it's integral in stories, right? And so yeah, I think it's really cool because one of the things that you have to think about when you're writing a screenplay is that villains think the story is about them, right? So the antagonist always believes that they are the main character of the story, right? So even if they're not actively opposing the protagonist, they believe they're the center of attention, and that everything has to do with them in some way in terms of the way the story works. So I think that level of conceit gets lost on the tabletop, the way you're describing it for Call of Cthulhu. Because even with the Mind's Eye Theater games, I've never seen that used.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned about the antagonist kind of thinking they're the main character. That's actually something that I learned by organizing Cthulhu Live events. When you're designing, and this is the approach I take to any character I'm writing up for any LARP scenario, you need to write every character as if they were the main character in their own story, but keeping in mind that there are many different kinds of stories in the world. So, yes, I will have characters that are written as if they were the main character in a classic H.P. Lovecraft story, but then I'll have another character who's written like the main character in a Brian Lumley Cthulhu Mythos story, and then the next character will be written as if they were the main character in a romantic comedy. But they're all written as if they were the main character, so that when the player comes into the scenario, they can treat it as if they were the main character. They will go in knowing, I'm not anybody's support, I'm not anybody's sidekick, I am the protagonist, and that's how I'm going to play it. And that's very empowering to the players, no matter what role they've got in the game.
Yeah, and that's something I noticed with Muerte El Chupacabras, one of the few physical products that I have.
Why, this one here, Muerte El Chupacabra from Skirmisher Publishing LLC, available at finer game stores everywhere?
Yes, that one actually. But I noticed that in the description of the characters, for their write-ups, that you can clearly see what they believe the story is about. Like the entire scenario is from their particular point of view, which is a far different cry from the way most gaming materials are written.
Yeah, that's one thing that Cthulhu Live is very good at, is having having those kind of magician's gambits where you give the you give the characters, you give the players just enough information to hang themselves, just enough information to play into the plot, and you have complete license to outright lie to the players about what the scenario is about. There's a character in this book who is a luchador, and the whole reason he's in this scenario is that the luchador's arch nemesis is another wrestler named El Chupacabra, and the whole reason is in this scenario is that he's taken one too many hits to the head and can't tell the difference between his professional wrestling persona and real life. So he thinks that the farmer has his wrestling rival chained up in his barn, and he wants to go there to challenge him to a bout in the ring. Now, of course, the character's not written to know that they've taken too many hits in the head and are a bit crazy. It's written completely straight, and it really makes that character live and breathe so much more. Mac, did you actually have a favorite scenario?
Gosh, let's see. I've got a few. I mean, I mentioned that. I mentioned Angel Prague is a lot of fun. Berlin Black, I know, is something we've also run a good bit. We've had a lot of fun with that one. One game that I always look fondly on every time we've run it, also though, is Preacher Man. Preacher Man can be a lot of fun, especially if you have the right people cast in the right roles. That's a fun game. That's really fun. It's set in a 1950s, kind of tent revival, and the Preacher Man is actually a cultist, and there's all kinds of stuff going on in there. And if you really get someone that can really play that role, who can improv and get up there and just start working the crowd and start sprinkling in this craziness in there while he's ranting and raving about God, it's fun. And there's just some fun side stories going on in that one too. That's a cool storyline.
Oh no, that is a very good one. I actually ran that back in college as well, and the guy who played the Preacher Man, a big part of that is that the Preacher Man can perform miracles, and the script describes how he looks like he's reaching into people and pulling out the diseases and things that are plaguing them. And so the guy who played my good buddy Jason Aarons, who I hope to get on the show sometime, he played the Preacher Man, and he made with liquid latex these little slimy tumor things and taught himself sleight of hand. So when he healed people, it actually looked like he was pulling tumors and things out of them, and it was fantastic. People did not see it coming. Oh, and that's also another big part of that game is having a barbecue dinner at the revival, and it creates one of those perfect scenarios where the players are thinking, well, I know that because there's a barbecue, I bet we're eating a dead human being. But on the other hand, I am so hungry and this smells so good. I guess I just have to eat it. And it's great just seeing that sort of dawning awareness come on the player's face. It's like, wait a minute, is this going to turn out to be a person later? Yeah, that is a classic scenario. We actually, I ran that when I was in Savannah, Georgia. We rewrote it and changed all the references from Mississippi to Georgia, and so it was a lot of local color we threw in there. It was really cool.
Okay.
Well, gentlemen, it is getting close to 10 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for this session of D Infinity Live. But before we do, we'll go ahead and do our final words, and Mac, as our guest, you will be given the final word. But my own, check Cthulhu Live out. Running a Cthulhu Live scenario is not nearly as daunting as it looks. All you need is some space, some friends, and a handful of creepy items that I bet you could find in a Goodwill, if you look around. So and it's just great. Do it. I'm very passionate about this game, so much so that I can't really talk straight right now. But absolutely, give Cthulhu Live a chance. And if you don't want to do it yourself, just wait for a convention to come around. There's a decent chance somebody's going to be running Cthulhu Live at the convention. It's very popular. And if you're going to be at Gen Con this year, we've got 2 big Cthulhu Live events. The first being Chitty Chitty Fatagan, which is a mashup between the Cthulhu mythos and the Roald Dahl, Ian Fleming movie about German barons and flying cars. And then the other is going to be Welcome to Suicide House, which is a Cthulhu Live scenario inspired by the work of podcaster Scott Aukerman, that all takes place in a mysterious house that is plagued by suicide attempts. Richard, what are your final thoughts?
Well, just let people know that if they want all of these great products that we've mentioned tonight that we have, they are currently on sale, and we do have a lot of them in bundles. So, good deals upon good deals for that on Drive-Thru RPG's website for their Christmas and July sale. So I'd say go check those out. And, just keep in mind that anything can be creepy. It just requires the right atmosphere.
Very cool. And Mac, as our guest, you have the final word.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you guys having me on, and I know I should really try to come on more often. Hopefully, I'll be on the next one. We've talked a little bit about wargaming, but no, honestly, I just want to say, it's I've been starting a game for years, and writing Cthulhu Live, running Cthulhu Live has been a lot of fun, and I certainly got to thank Will and all the other Will, PST, all the other great groups out there that keep Cthulhu Live going, introducing it to new people, and I'm really glad that so many people out there still have a good time with it.
Excellent. So for myself, William Big T Thrasher, for Richard T Balsley, for Robert Mac McLaughlin, and for the sadly absent Brendan Cass and Michael Jolly Varhola, this has been D Infinity Live. We will see you all next week when our topic will be War Games.